Have you ever thought about a world where your entire future, who you could marry, what you could own, even whether you'd rule a kingdom, was all decided by ancient, unspoken rules? Well, today, we're going to jump back about 2,500 years to ancient India to decode the hidden social rules that shaped family, power, and class.
So, here's the big question. How on earth do historians figure this stuff out? How do they know who inherited property, who was allowed to marry who, or who really held the power when so much time has passed?
Well, they basically become detectives. They hunt for clues left behind in ancient texts, piecing together the story of a society. And for ancient India, their single biggest piece of evidence is a massive epic poem, the Mahabharata.
All right, so let's dive into our first piece of evidence. And it is truly epic. To understand the society, we first have to wrap our heads around this massive 100,000-verse story. So at its heart, the Mahabharata is really the story of a giant family feud. You've got two groups of warring cousins, the Kauravas and the Pandavas, and they are locked in this absolutely brutal fight for control of their kingdom.
And when I say this thing is epic, I am not exaggerating. The text has over 100,000 verses. That makes it one of the longest poems ever written, period. It's just a treasure trove of information.
But, this is where the detective work gets really tricky. The Mahabharata wasn't written down all at once by one person. It was composed, told, and retold over 1,000 years, starting way back around 500 BCE. Just imagine all the social changes that got baked into the story over that much time. And that long history created another huge problem. As the story was told and retold, countless different versions popped up all over the Indian subcontinent. So with all these variations, how could a historian possibly pick one reliable text to study? Which one is the real one?
This is where a truly incredible feat of scholarship comes in. Back in 1919, a team of scholars led by V.S. Sukthankar started a massive project to create what's called a critical edition. They went all over the country, collecting different Sanskrit manuscripts, and then painstakingly compared them, verse by verse, looking for the parts that were common to most of them.
And after 47 years, this is what they made, a 13,000-page masterpiece. The main text you see here has the verses they found in almost all the versions. But look at all that smaller text at the bottom. Those are footnotes documenting thousands of regional differences. This is so cool because it shows us that there was never just one Mahabharata. It was a living story that people adapted and changed over centuries.
Okay, so now our detectives have their evidence. What did it actually reveal about society? Well, that brings us to the ideal of patrilineal. It turns out this family feud tells us everything we need to know about family and power. Right, so the main story is this big fight between the Kauravas and their cousins, the Pandavas, all over land and power. It leads to this huge, devastating war, and in the end, the Pandavas win. And what's the very first thing they establish? Patrilineal succession. The entire epic seems to be built to reinforce this one core idea. Inheritance passes from father to son. And you can feel just how high the stakes were right in the text itself. Listen to this line from Duryodhana, the eldest Kaurava, just seething with jealousy. If the Pandava receives the patrimony, his son will surely inherit it in turn. We ourselves with our sons shall be excluded from the royal succession. So you see, this isn't some abstract rule. It's about who gets everything and who gets left with absolutely nothing. So what exactly is patrilineal? Well, it's pretty simple. It's the system of tracing your family line and inheritance directly from father to son to grandson and on and on. It meant that sons, and really only sons, could claim the family's resources. And if you were royalty, that meant the throne. And just to make it super clear, this is the polar opposite of matrilineal, where descent is traced through the mother's side of the family. The Mahabharata, though, is all in on the patrilineal model, especially for the ruling class. Now, this intense focus on the male line had a huge ripple effect on every other part of society, especially marriage. So for our next section, let's look at the rules that were designed to keep those family lines secure. You see, in a patrilineal system, the logic is pretty straightforward. Sons were absolutely essential for continuing the family name and lineage. Daughters, though, were seen completely differently. They had no claim to the family's wealth and were pretty much expected to be married off into other families outside their own kin group. And these expectations led to some very specific social rules. Let's just quickly break down 4 key terms you see in these ancient texts. Exogamy is marrying outside your family group. That was the ideal for daughters.
Endogamy is the opposite, marrying within your group. Then you have polygyny, a man with several wives, and polyandry, a woman with several husbands.
So for the elite families, marrying your daughters outside the kin group, exogamy, was the way to go. This practice, called kanyadana, or the gift of a daughter, was seen as a father's sacred religious duty. It was more than just a custom. It was a way to build alliances and boost the family status. Daughters literally became political tools.
And get this ancient mantra from the Rig Veda, which is still used in some weddings, just perfectly captures this whole idea. I free her from here, but not from there. Here is her father's home. There is her husband's. And the goal is spelled out right there, to bind her to her new family so she will have fine sons. The purpose of marriage couldn't be clearer: produce male heirs for her husband's family line.
Okay, so these ideas weren't just informal norms floating around in stories. Eventually, they were written down and turned into actual law. So in our final section, let's look at how these social norms became sacred rules.
So, starting around 500 BC, new towns and cities started popping up, and social life got way more complicated. You had people from all over meeting, trading, sharing ideas, and, naturally, starting to question the old ways of doing things. In response to this, Brahmanas, the priests and scholars, started to lay down detailed, formal codes of social behavior. These codes were put into Sanskrit texts known as the Dharma Sutras and Dharma Shastras. Probably the most famous one is the Manusmriti. And the goal of these books was to spell out a set of universal rules that they believed everyone in society should follow, basically cementing the ideals we see in the Mahabharata into law.
But here's the crucial question for our historical detectives, right? Were these rules actually followed by everybody? Well, most historians now think that while these texts were seen as important, they weren't always obeyed. Real life was a lot messier. These rules were sometimes questioned, and in some cases, people just flat out ignored them.
And that really brings us to a final thought. The Mahabharata and these ancient legal texts described a world from thousands of years ago, but their ideas about family, inheritance, and marriage were incredibly powerful and long-lasting. So the question I want to leave you with is this: where do you still see the echoes of these ancient codes in the world around us today?